Hey guys, I'm Taufik. Now in this video, I'm going to talk about a platform where you can find hundreds of different SQL queries that you can solve right there on their platform. And you don't need to install any database, you don't need to install any software in order to solve or use this platform. Now the platform that I'm talking about is StrataScratch. Now this is a platform where you would find interview questions related to Python, SQL, and also non-coding interview questions. Now we'll mainly focus on SQL. Now as far as SQL goes, I believe that there are over 500 different SQL interview questions. Now, these are the interview questions that have been actually asked by the big tech companies like Facebook, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, LinkedIn, etc. So, I have been reviewing their platform from past few weeks. I have reviewed several of their interview questions, that is SQL interview questions, and I have solved some of their SQL interview questions. And from what I see, the quality of questions are actually pretty good, and the platform itself is pretty easy to use. So in this video, I will be solving 3 different SQL questions from StrataScratch. As always, when I'm solving these questions, I'll be explaining you my thinking behind using a particular logic and explaining you the step-by-step process of solving a particular question. Hopefully with this you will get an idea of how to solve different SQL questions and how to use a StrataScratch to improve your SQL skills. Now I really like a StrataScratch platform because it kind of gives you an opportunity to look at over 500 different SQL questions and then solve it right there at their platform. And I really wish that each and every one of you would be able to use this platform and improve your SQL skills. And that is why I reached out to the StrataScratch team asking if they can provide me any special discount. And they very kindly have given me a special discount code which you can use to get a 15% off. Now if you click on the link that I will be mentioning in the description below and then use the coupon code SS15, which I will also mention in the description below, you will get a 15% off on any of the subscription plan that you choose. I hope this will be helpful to you guys. Now without wasting any more time, let's get started. But before that, if you like my work and if you'd like to support this channel, definitely consider subscribing and give me a thumbs up. Thank you, and let's begin. Okay, so before I can start solving SQL queries on StrataScratch, let me first walk you through the StrataScratch platform. Now, if you have not created a free account on StrataScratch, that is the first thing that you will need to do. So you can click on register and create your free account. Now, I have already done that, so I'm just going to click login. Now, this will take me to a page where you would find hundreds of different SQL problems or Python problems that you can solve right here on StrataScratch. Now, in order to choose only the SQL problems, so I can just choose the code type equal to PostgreSQL. Now I can also see that they have added MySQL a beta version, but for now I'm just going to choose a PostgreSQL. Now even though it's mentioning PostgreSQL here, it does not mean that these are the problems that can only be solved in PostgreSQL. You can of course solve this in any other RDBMS as well. So if you want to solve these problems in any of your personal RDBMS that you have in your own computer, like let's say MS SQL, MySQL, Oracle, or any other RDBMS, then you can just replicate the same table structure and the data, and then you can try to solve these questions. Now I believe that the reason why you see PostgreSQL in StrataScratch is because I believe StrataScratch is using the PostgreSQL database to execute these queries. Now let's say you wanted to find only those problems which were asked by the FANG companies in their interviews, then I can just click on this. Then this would show me all the questions that were asked by FANG companies. And let's say if you wanted to solve only those SQL questions related to some specific concept. So for example, let's say either subqueries, or let's say if I choose window functions, then this would show me all the SQL problems that you can solve using window functions. And the same thing goes for all the different concepts in SQL that you would find on the right side here. So you can basically filter out any type of questions that you would like to solve in order to practice different types of SQL queries. Okay, now let's say you have solved some of these questions, and if you wanted to check your performance, then you can just go to profile and click on your performance, and this would basically show you all the different problems that you have solved. So you can see all the problems that you have solved down here, and how many problems you have solved in the easy, medium, and hard level. You can check it out here. So it's a pretty simple platform that you can use. You can also find non-coding questions by going to the tab here, and you would find questions related to probability, statistics, and a few others. Okay, so we'll mainly focus on coding questions, and we'll just choose the SQL problems. So let's try to solve the very first question in today's video. So the first question that I'm going to solve is, I'm going to choose it from the top interview questions, and let's say I'm going to choose this particular problem, that is users by average session time. So I'm just going to right click and open it in a new tab, and this is basically how each question in StrataScratch would look like. Now I'm going to show you two different solutions to solve this problem. The first solution we are going to be using is subqueries, and then secondly I'm going to use just joins to solve this problem. Okay, so let's see how we can do that. Now first thing is, you can see that this is a medium level problem. It was asked by Facebook or the Meta company, and it is an interview question. Okay, so the question name is users by average session time, and this is basically the problem statement. So let me first read the problem statement and let's try to understand the problem first and then try to write our SQL query. Okay, so the statement reads, calculate each user's average session time. So we basically need to find the session time for each user. That is basically our requirement. A session is defined as the time difference between the page load and the page exit. So they have already given us the definition for what a session time is. Okay, and then they have given us some assumptions here saying that for simplicity, assume a user has only one session per day. Okay, and if there are multiple of the same events on that day, consider only the latest page load and earliest page exit. Okay, output the user ID and the average session time. So let's try to understand these questions once we look at the table data. Okay, now all the tables that will be related to this question will be mentioned here. So we have this one table, Facebook _ web _ log. Now in order to view the structure of this table, you can basically check it here, and in order to see the data in this table, I can just click on the preview button here. So when I click on the preview button, this is basically where you would see the data in that particular table. Okay, now as you can see, this table has three different columns. So I have the user ID, I have the timestamp, and then I have the action. Now user ID, we can see we have data for different users. So for 0, 1, I think 2, etc. Okay, and then the timestamp basically has the date as well as the time values under this column. Okay, and then we have the action. The action can be page load, scroll down, scroll up, page exit, etc. Now let's try to understand this question. So what we have been asked to do in this particular problem is we need to find each user's average session time. Okay, and how do we define a session time? Because in this table here, I don't see any column which has a session time. So we will basically have to calculate the session time. So how do we calculate the session time? The session time is defined as the difference between page load and page exit. Now we have something like page load here, and then we have something like page exit here. Okay, so from just by looking at this question and just by looking at this data, what I can say is for each user, so let's say for user ID 0 and for the date 25th April 2019, I have, I think, this many records here, and out of these many records, I have two different page loads, and the last page load was on 13/30/18 and the page exit was on 13/31/40. Okay, so if I had to find the session time, that would basically be the difference between the page exit time and the page load time. So that would be 13/31/40 minus 13/30/18 would basically give me the session time. Now you might ask, why am I considering the page load as this one 13/30/18 and why not 13/30/15? And that is because of the assumption that they have given here. They have told for each day a user is only going to have one session, and if there are multiple same events on that day, then consider the latest page load. So they have asked us for the same day, okay, and for the same user, if there are multiple page load, then consider the latest page load. So when I say latest page load, the page load that happened later on. Okay, so basically the maximum of these page loads, I just need to take that. And when it comes to page exit, I need to consider the earliest page exit. Okay, now these are a couple of assumptions that is going to be useful when we are going to be deriving our logic. Okay, and finally, once we have got the session time for each user and each date, we need to find the average session time per user. Okay, so this is going to be our final output, and if you wanted to see the expected output, I can just click on this expected output here, and here you can see what is basically the output that StrataScratch is expecting for this particular problem. So you can see I have the user ID 0 and 1, then I have average session time. Right, now you might see that we have user ID 0 and 1, but then in this table here I also have user ID 2, but it's not shown in the output. The reason for that is user ID 2 here for this date 25th April 2019, it has page load, it has scroll down and scroll up, but there is basically no page exit. Now as per our definition that has been given, a session time is basically the difference between page exit and page load. So both page exit and page load must be present on that particular day for that particular user, but here there is no page exit present for this user 2, and hence this will not be part of our output. Okay, now this kind of analysis can be actually pretty useful when you're trying to solve some complex questions, and this problem is slightly complex to understand at first, and that is why I'm explaining you all of this process. Okay, but let's say even after analyzing all of this data, these questions, the expected output, you're still not able to understand what you need to do. You still have the option of clicking on this approach hints. Okay, so StrataScratch is also providing you some hints which you can use to solve these problems. Okay, so you basically have everything that you need to solve this problem, and now let's try to solve this problem. Now, as I always tell you, whenever you have a problem which might look a little complex to solve, it's always better to split the problem into a few different parts and then try to solve each of these parts individually and then try to merge all of them together to get your final output. Okay, and that is exactly what we are going to do in this particular problem. So let's first write down what is exactly what we need to do. Okay, so I know that just by looking at this statement, we are supposed to find the average session time per user, right? So our requirement is to find the average session time per user. This is what we need, right? So let's see what are the different steps that we need to follow in order to come up with this final output. Okay, so just by looking at this data, I can see that I just have one table which has both the page load time as well as the page exit time, and then for the same user for the same date there can be multiple page load time and there can be some data where there are multiple page exit time. So we somehow need to segregate the data such that for each user for a particular day we only get one record with one particular page load time, and the same thing for page exit time. Okay, so the first thing that we will do is find the page load time for each user per day, right? And the same thing we'll do for page exit. So find the page exit time for each user per day. Okay, so first let's find the page load time and then we'll try to find the page exit time. So once we have these two things, then find the session time. Okay, session time, which is equal to basically 2 minus 1, right? Because the difference between the exit time and the load time is actually my session time. So this is what we are going to find in the third step. And finally, once we have the session time, the last step is to find the average session time based on each user. Okay, so just to solve this problem, I have split this into 4 different parts. Okay, so first let's find the load time for each user and for each day. Then we'll do the same thing for the exit time. Once we have the exit and the load time, then we will try to subtract them or basically find the difference, which will basically be my session time. And then finally, we'll try to get the average session time for each user. So let's go back to StrataScratch here and try to solve this. Now, in order to solve these problems, we can write our SQL queries straight here in this particular tab that you can see. Now I'm just going to expand that by clicking on this arrow button here, and just I'm going to move this down. Now we know that all of our data is present in this one table. So I'm just going to say that our intention is to find the page load times, right? So I'm just going to say where action equal to page load. Okay, so when I do action equal to page load, I'll get all the page load data. But then the problem is I need to segregate the data based on each day and for each user, right? But I have this timestamp column which basically has the day information as well as the time information. So what I'm going to do is, just for better clarity, I'm going to have date separate and then time separate. Okay, so what I'll just do is I'll just say user ID, okay, and then timestamp. Now in PostgreSQL, if I wanted to extract a date from a timestamp column, then I can just use this symbol, that is double colon, and then I mention date. So when I say double colon date, from this particular column, it's only going to fetch the date. Okay, and I'm going to name this as, let's say, the date value, okay, or date. And then the same way, in order to extract the time, I'm just going to use this same column. I'll use double colon and I'll use time, okay, and this will basically be my, let's say, load time. Okay, now if you're using any other RDBMS, let's say in Oracle we have toDate, which you can use to extract the date or the time, and then in I think MySQL you have a date format, and in I think MS SQL you have I think convert and cast, etc. So different RDBMS would have different functions, but in PostgreSQL we can easily do that by using this particular double colon symbol and then the data type. Okay, so if I execute this, let's see what happens. Now I executed this and you can see that I am getting only a few records because these are the only records where the action is page load, and for page load I'm getting the date and the time. But the only problem is, you can see for the user 0, on 25th April, I have two records because there were two page loads, one at 13:30, 15 seconds, and then the second one was 3 seconds after the first page load. Okay, now this is actually fine and the data is actually not wrong, but the problem is for us to find the session time, we need to know what is a page load and a page exit time. So for a particular day, there should be just one page load and there should be just one page exit, so we can do the difference and get the session time, right? So out of these two page loads, which is the page load that I should consider? And that is exactly what is already mentioned in the question here, saying that let's say if there are multiple of the same events on that day, consider only the latest page load. So they have asked us to fetch the latest payload. Okay, and that is exactly what we are going to do. So I know that we have multiple page loads here and the date and the user is basically the same. So I'm just going to segregate this data based on the user ID and the date in order to fetch just the latest page load. Okay, how I can do that is just by grouping the data together. So I'm just going to say group by user ID, comma, I'm just going to copy this whole thing. Okay, I'm just going to paste it here, and instead of fetching both these times, I'm just going to fetch the time that is, let's say, the max of this time. Okay, that is the latest page load. Now if I just run this, now you can see that for each user for a particular day, I'm just getting one page load time. Okay, so this is the 25th April, I have this particular time, and then for 28th April I have this particular time, and so on and so forth for the other users and other dates. Okay, so I think this query that I have written here is actually pretty good for me to fetch the page load for each user for each day. Okay, so for each user for each day, I'll only get one page load time, that is from this query. So this is basically the first part of our query. Okay, so we have got the page load time. Now we need to write another query to fetch the page exit time. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, since we are going to have multiple parts of the query, I'm just going to use a with clause and I'm going to place this whole query inside a with clause. I'm going to call this like, let's say, page load as, and I'm just going to move this, let's say, and now let me write another query which is going to fetch me the exit time, that is for each user for each day, what is the exit time. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to copy this whole thing. Okay, but before that, let me just complete this query. So I'm just going to say select star from whatever this query is, right? So this name, page load, right? So if I run this, you'll see that I'm still getting the same output, exactly that. Now what I'm going to do is, this is basically my one subquery that I have created, and I have placed this subquery inside the with clause and I've given a name like page load. Now for page exit, in order to find the exit time for that user for that particular date, what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to copy this whole query here. I'll add a comma here and I'll paste this query here, and maybe I'll give an alias here. So let's say page exit, okay, as. And I think that's all. So I'm just creating another subquery, and here my action has to be page exit because I'm trying to find the exit time, right? And one thing that you need to remember is here, whenever we had multiple or number of the same units for a particular day, then the assumption was to fetch the latest page load time. That is why we used max of page load time. But for page exit, it's asking us to fetch the earliest. That means we need to go for the minimum of the time, right? So, and that is why here, instead of using max, I will be using minimum. Okay, and this will not be my load time, but this will be, let's say, my exit time. Okay, and I think everything else is the same. So this is exactly the same query that I already explained at the top here. Okay, and this is fine. And let's say if I just had to show you the exit data from the exit table, and if I just run this, you can see that this is basically my exit time, and you can see I'm only getting user 0 and 1 because as I told you previously, for user 2 there is no exit time available, right? So I'm just getting the data for 0 and 1 for the two different dates and their exit time. Okay, so this looks fine. Now what I need to do is I have the load time here, I have the exit time here. Now I need to join them together so that I can then compare the load time with the exit time to get the session time. Right? So how do I join these two tables together or these two queries together? Basically, I have the user ID. Of course, I can join on that. And then I have the date because I know that these two are basically the same table. So they basically are the same users. And this is the load and exit time at the same date, right? So I can just join using the user ID and the date. Right? So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to use this table page load. Okay, and I'm going to give an alias for this, like let's say PL, and I'm going to join this with, let's say, page exit, and I'm going to alias like PE, and I'm going to use the join condition. So my join condition here is going to be PL dot user ID equal to PE dot user ID. Okay, and then I also can join it based on PL dot date, because I cannot just join on user ID, right? Because the same user might have logged in on different dates as well. So I need to also consider the date. So I'm just going to say PL dot date equal to PE dot date. And then I also am going to add another condition here. Okay, that is just like a validation check. Okay, because I know that whenever a user logs into an application, he will first log in and then he will log out. So when I say login, it's basically the load time, and when he's logging out, it's basically the exit time, right? So the exit time has to always be greater than the load time, right? The exit time cannot be prior to the load time. If it is, then it is something wrong with the data. Okay, so just to do that additional check, I'm just going to say PE dot let's say exit time should always be greater than PL dot load time. Okay, so this should be basically all my checks, and here I'm just going to say PL dot user ID. I'm just going to fetch the user ID, and I'm going to fetch the date, and then finally I'm going to fetch both of these times. Okay, so I'll just not use an alias because these are unique columns in each of these subqueries. I'm just going to say exit time comma load time. Okay, so I've just fetched these 4 columns. I have joined based on these conditions, and I think everything looks fine for now. And let me just remove this additional space just so that we have more space, okay, here. And maybe I'll just move this to the right so it becomes kind of more neat. Okay, so 2 subqueries, and then I'm joining them, and then I'm just fetching these 4 columns. Now if I run this query here, now you can see I'm getting the output. So I'm getting 4 records. I have the user ID, date, I have the exit time and the load time. So this is fine. So basically I have finished the first part of my query and I have finished the second part of my query. So I have got the load time, exit time, and I have also joined them. Now the third thing is to find the session time. The session time is 2 minus 1. That is, if I just subtract exit time with the load time, that should basically give me my session time. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to use a minus here, and I'm just going to put basically call this like, let's say, session time. Okay, and now if I run this, you can now see that I have only 3 columns. So I have user ID and the date and the session time. Now this looks fine, and you can see that this is a user 0. For 25th April, his session time was 82 seconds, and for 28th April, user 0 had spent 3685 seconds. Okay, now this is fine, but our requirement from this query here is that we need to output the user ID and their average session time. Okay, just the user ID and the average session time. So if I just go back here, and let's say if I go here, I can see that I have the user ID, I have the date, and then I have the session time. Now I don't really need the date because I need to find the average session time per user. So if I just group the data based on the user ID and then find the average of these 2 session time, I should basically get my final output. So what I'm going to do is I'm just modifying this same query. So here I'll just group the data based on user ID. So I'm just going to say group by PL dot user ID. Okay, and then I don't need the date because I just need to find the average of the session time based on the user ID. And in order to find the average of the session time, I can just use the aggregate function average, right? And I think that's all. So now if I just move this up and if I run this query, you can see that I'm getting the data and I have a user ID 0 and 1. I'm getting the average session time. Now let's check if this solution is right. I'm just going to click on this check solution, and you can see that it's telling your solution is correct. Congratulations. So looks like what we have done here is working fine and we're getting the expected output. Now, I hope you understood this query. One last thing that I want to talk about a StrataScratch here is that if I just move back, and then if you wanted to see all the different submissions that you have done, you can just go to your submissions tab, and all the multiple submissions that you have done, you would be able to see here, and also your solution. Okay, and then you have another tab here, solution discussion. This is basically where you would find the solution to this problem already given by StrataScratch. Now, whenever you're trying to solve a problem, I would recommend that you never look at this solution. First, try to solve the problem on your own if you're not able to solve it, only then look at the solution. You also have some discussion tab below where users would have suggested some other solutions or some any remarks, anything that they might have. So these are all the things that you have in StrataScratch. Now, one last thing that I want to do here is, as I told you in the beginning, I can solve this problem in multiple different ways, and I just showed you one way of solving this problem by using subquery. So I've used a subquery here, I used a subquery here, and then I used this main query, this entire main query to solve this problem. But I think there is a better way to solve this problem, and that is by just using self join. Okay, because I know that this is just the same table that I'm using multiple times and just based on different conditions, right? Instead of putting them in two different subqueries, I can just do a self join and I can basically simplify this query and also shrink this query. So let me give you another solution for the same problem. Now, in order to find another solution, what basically I'm going to do is, now you can see that I have, this is one subquery, this is the second subquery, then I'm joining these two subqueries using all of these lines of queries, right? So instead of having all of this, what I'm just going to do is, I'm just going to use the same table twice using the self join and then join it right there using just one single query. Okay, let's just see how I'm going to do that. So I'm going to write a fresh query here. Okay. Okay, so I'll move this here. Maybe I'll just leave some space and I'm just going to write it here. Okay, so I'm just going to say with data as, and I'm just going to quickly write this query because I already explained everything, and I'm just going to explain you what is the difference. Okay, so what I'll just do is I'll just copy this whole thing. Okay, this inner query, or basically the query that I used to page load, I'm just going to paste it here. Okay, and I'll just move this. Yeah, maybe I'll just move this right. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I've taken one table, that is Facebook weblog, and I'm just taking data for the page load. Okay, now I just want this query to not only fetch me page load, but it should also fetch me the page exit time. So how I'm going to do is I'm going to join this table to itself. So first I'm going to give an alias for this. Let's say I'm going to call this like PL, and then I'm going to join the same table. Okay, and I'm going to call this, let's say, like PE. Okay, for page exit, and here I'm going to do the join condition. Now the join condition I'm going to be using is the same thing that I used at the top. So I'm going to join these two tables based on its user ID and based on its date, and I'm also going to put this check saying that the exit time should always be greater than the load time. Okay, and then in this action I know that my page load, or basically PL table, should be for the page load action, right? So I'm just going to say PL.action equal to page load, and similarly I'm going to add another condition which is for my second table here. Okay, and that is the PE table. So I'm just going to say PE.action equal to page exit. Okay, so what basically I'm doing is, just inside one single query I'm using the same table twice. So basically doing a self join given two different aliases and joining them using the same condition that I used previously, and then I'm segregating these two tables saying that the PL table is for page load and PE table is for page exit. Okay, now this is all fine, but there are a few modifications that I need to do. First thing is I'm using this user ID and timestamp. Now both these tables are having user ID and timestamp, so I need to specify from which table I'm going to refer to this. So I'm just going to say PL dot user ID, and the same thing here. And you can also use PE because they both will be the same, but I'll just use PL dot timestamp. And then for this one as well, I'm just going to say PL dot timestamp. Okay, now here you can see that I'm fetching the load time from the PL table. Okay, that is fine. But in order to fetch the exit time, I'm just going to be using the PE table. So I'm just going to copy this exit time thing that I have written in the previous query. I'm going to put a comma here, and I'm going to say min of PE dot timestamp, and then fetch the extract basically the time from this column, which will basically be my exit time. So I'm getting the user ID, date, the load time, and the exit time, and I think everything else looks fine. Okay, but here I need to mention this is going to be PL dot user ID, and then here it's going to be PL dot timestamp. Okay, so I think all of this is good. Let me just execute this query and see if it works. So I'm just going to say select star from data, and if I run this, let's see what happens. Okay, I'm getting an error. Let's see what's the error. Column PL.date does not exist. PL.date. Okay, so there are a few other things that I need to change here because there is nothing like PL.date, right? We have timestamp only. So from the timestamp column, I need to extract the date. So I'm just going to copy, let's say, this much. Okay, so instead of date, I'll just put timestamp colon date, and then for the exit time as well, I just need to use this one, right? So I'm just going to say timestamp colon time. I'm going to put it for the exit time as well as for the load time. Okay, so I hope everything is fine now. Now let me try to execute. and you can see that now I'm getting the data, but the only thing is I'm getting two different records for each user ID because they are having data for two different dates. Okay, but then this is again the load time and exit time. So what we need to do is we need to find the session time, right? So in order to find the session time, what I can just do is here I'll just say user ID comma date, and then I will say exit time comma load time. Okay, and now if I run this, now you can see, okay, I have not given a column name here, and maybe I'll just give a column name here for this, like let's say as session time. Okay, and now if I execute this, now you can see I'm getting the session time. Now as we saw previously, we are having two different records because this user logged on two different dates. But what we need is for each user we need to find the average session time. In order to find the average session time based on each user, I need to group this data based on the user, right? And then I need to find the average of this particular column. So how I can just do that is I'm just going to say group by, that is user ID, and then here I'm just going to say average. Okay, so that's all the same logic that I used in the previous query. Okay, and now if I just run this, okay, I'm getting an error. Okay, that is because I'm using this date. I don't need this date because I need to group the data based on user ID only and then find the average session time. So I removed the date, and now if I run this, now I am getting the data expected output. So if I run the check solution, and yes, this is correct, your solution is correct, congratulations. So basically you can see that okay, I think there's one problem here. I have two different queries here. So let me just do one thing. Let me just comment out this query. Okay, I don't know how exactly both these queries were executed. Not sure if the first query was executed or if the second query was executed. So just to make it more clear, I'm just going to comment out the first query, and I'm just going to have this query here. Okay, so now let me just run this, and it's still fine. It's giving me the output. If I do a check solution, it's still fine. So I'm getting the output. Okay, so I'll just show you this query, what I have written. Now previously we wrote this query, and let me move this here. It was a pretty big query where I had multiple subqueries, a subquery for finding the load time, another subquery for finding the exit time, and then joining them separately, and then finding aggregating them and finding the average session time. Whereas in the second query, what I have done is I've just used the self join, the same table joined it to itself, and then did the join, specified for which action each table is specific to, and then I have just taken all the columns that I need, found the session time, and then did the average. Okay, so this is actually a better query for this particular solving this particular problem because I'm not using multiple subqueries. I'm just using one subquery and then one main query. Okay, so I hope both of this solution was helpful to you. I think someone asked me yesterday, can I write the same query using joins, and can I write the same query using subqueries, and this is actually a pretty good example for that. I hope this was useful and you understood how to solve this problem and how to use StrataScratch. Now let me proceed and solve another question on this platform, which I think is a pretty interesting question as well. So let me go back here and choose the latest active interview question, and here I'm just going to choose this question, that is seat availability. Open it in a new tab. Now this is the second problem that we are going to be solving in this video. Okay, so the question name is seat availability, and you can see that it's a hard problem. It's asked by a company called Robinhood, and it's an active interview question. Okay, now let's try to solve this question. So as always, the first thing about solving a particular problem is to first understand the problem statement and then look at the input data and then come up with a logic that we can use to solve this problem. Okay, so the problem statement states that a movie theater gave you two tables. Okay, seats that are available for an upcoming screening and neighboring seats for each seat listed. So when they say movie theater gave you two tables, these are not the dining tables, these are actually the database tables, and the two tables are mentioned here. So we have the theater availability and theater seat map, and they're explaining what these tables are having. So the theater availability is basically the table that tells you if the seats in the theater are available. Okay, and you can see that this is a table name, this is the structure here, and if I click on preview, you can see that this table has a few records and it has a seat number. These are all the different seats in the theater, and false means that the seat is not available and true means that this seat is available. Okay, so this is the first table, and then we have another table which is the theater seat map, which again, as you can see the structure here, it has three different columns, and if I click on preview, you can see that it has a seat number, and then it also has information about what are its adjacent seats. So what is the seat that is to the left of this seat number, and what is the seat which is to the right of that seat number. Okay, so if I look at this second row here, you can see that I have seat number 12. So the left of 12 there is a seat by the number 11, and to the right of 12 there is a seat by the number 13. Okay, so this is a table which is giving you information about the adjacent seats, and the first table here is basically giving you if a seat is available or not. Okay, now let's go back to our question. Now our question states that you are asked to find all pairs of seats that are both adjacent and available. Okay, so our requirement is we need to find only those seats which are available, a pair of seats which are available and which are adjacent to each other. Okay, so and also here there are certain rules or conditions saying that output only distinct pairs of seats in two columns, such that the seat number with the lower number is always in the first column and the one with the higher number is in the second column. So if I click on the expected output here, you can see that the output should have two final columns, so available seat 1 and available seat 2. So it should have let's say 14, 15, 21, 22, 22, 23 and 32, 33. So basically these are all adjacent seats, and one more thing is that all these seats are actually available. So what we need to do is we need to somehow write a query which is going to go through this adjacent seats table, and it's going to find which are the adjacent seats, and then it's going to find if the seats are available. Okay, now one thing that you need to remember is the theater seat map table that we have here, right, is basically having information about the adjacent seats. But one thing is these adjacent seats are basically information about three adjacent seats, right? Because our expected output, we are only asked to display two adjacent seats, that is a pairs of seats that are both adjacent and available, right? But the table that we have, the input table that we have, that is a theater seat map, has basically information about three adjacent seats. So somehow we need to first come up with a way to modify these three adjacent seats into two adjacent seats, and then we need to check if all of these seats are available or not. Okay, now as always, whenever we have to solve a problem and if it looks a little tricky, it's always better to break the problem into multiple different parts. So let's just see how we can solve different parts of this problem and then merge them together to provide the final output. Okay, so the first thing is we can see that our requirement is to find all the pairs of seats that are adjacent and available. Okay, so the first thing is find all the adjacent seats, right? Once you have found that, then find, okay, check if the, okay, or I can just say from 1, check if left seat is available, right? And then I'll do the third step, which is from 1, check if the right seat is available. Now let's try to understand what I'm writing here. So we need to first find the adjacent seats. Okay, so we basically somehow need to, from this particular table, we need to extract only the adjacent seats, that is a seat on the left and a seat on the right. Okay, once we get that information, then for every seat that is on the left, we need to check if it is available. Once that is fine, then we can also check for every seat on the right, we should check if it is available. If we can do this, then hopefully we should get our final output. So let's see how we can solve this. So again, to solve this, I'm going to use this particular tab here, and I'm just going to make it a little big. Okay, so the first thing is to get the adjacent seats. So our adjacent seats information is present in this table, that is theater seat map. And if I run that, you can see this information. So how do I change these three adjacent seats into two adjacent seats? Now, before I can do that, let me just rearrange these columns. So just that it becomes more easier to understand. Okay, so I have the seat number, I have the left seat, I have the right seat. So basically what this table represents is, if I just move this to little up, what this table represents is I have seat left. Okay, this is the seat, and I'm going to name this like, let's say left seat. Okay, so maybe I'll just call it like left seat. Okay, and then I have the center seat, right? The center seat in this case would be this seat number, right? I'm just going to say seat number, which is going to, oh, okay, I need to have my cursor here. So this is seat number, which is going to be given an alias like, let's say the center seat. Okay, and then finally I have, what is the third column? It is the seat right. The seat right, which I'm going to give an alias like, let's say right seat. Okay, now if I just run this, basically I'm not done any changes. I'm just rearranging this column such that the left goes to the left, then the seat number comes to the center, and the right seat will be on the right. Okay, just so that I can explain you better. So now you can see that I have the left seat. Okay, if I just, maybe I'll just move this little up. Now you can see that I have the left seat, then I have the center seat and the right seat. So if I just look at this second row here, so the left seat is 11, then the center seat is 12, and the right seat is 13. And then I go to the next row, I can see the left seat is 12, the center seat is 13, the right seat is 14. So I think this is in better sequence for us to understand how the seats are arranged, right? But what I need is, in my final output, I just need a pair of adjacent seats. So I just need 11 and 12 together, and then 12 and 13 should be in the next row, and then 13 and 14 in the next row, and so on and so forth, right? So how do I modify this query to have that kind of value? So how I can just do that is, I'll just remove this right seat here, or basically what I'm just going to do is, I'm going to copy this whole thing, okay? And I'm going to use an union clause here, and I'm going to do this. Okay, basically paste the same query, and what I'm going to do is, I'm going to have the seat left, basically the left seat as it is, then I'm going to have the seat number, which is basically my seat, that is my center seat. But now, since I do not want to have 3 adjacent seats, but I only want to have 2 adjacent seats, so what happens is, the left seat would definitely be the left seat, but the center seat in this case would actually become my right seat. Right, so this would be the right seat and this would be the left seat. Now similarly, when I come to the next part, now I have taken all the left seat and I have taken all the center seat and made that center seat as a right seat, and the same way now I need to next take all the center seat and then I need to take the right seat. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to remove this left seat here, I'm going to have this center seat, right? But I'm going to name this center seat like, let's say, left seat, and my seat on the right, or the right seat, would again be the right seat. Okay, I hope this is not too confusing. If you just think a little harder, you would get what I'm trying to do. So I have 3 adjacent seats here, left, center and right, but I only want 2 adjacent seats, right? So I want left and right and left and right. So I'm taking all this left and right as basically one data set, and then I'm taking all of this center seat and this right seat as another data set, and when doing so, I'm just renaming these columns just to make it more meaningful. Okay, so now if I run this query, now we can see that I'm having the left seat and the right seat. Now this, I think, is a pretty good data that we have, based on which now we can filter this data further to check that all the seats that are shown here, are they actually available or not. Okay, so this basically what I have written here is basically the first part of my query, and I'm just going to name it, basically place it inside my with clause. I'm going to name this like, let's say, adjacent seats. I'll just move this to the right, and let's say I'm just going to open this, close this parenthesis here. Okay, and I'll just say select star from adjacent seats, and if I run this again, it's going to be the same output, but just showing you this. Okay, so I think we have finished the first part of our query, that is to find the adjacent seats. Now let's go into the second part of the query, where we need to check every left seat that is present in this particular adjacent seat, are they available or not. Okay, so in this particular output that I have got from that query that I have just written, I need to now check all of these left seats that you see here, right? Are these seats available or not? Now, how can I do that? I know that I have this table theater availability. Now this theater availability has a column seat number, and this seat number is basically the seat number that is mentioned in the left seat. So if whatever seats are present here, if I check these seats in this seat number that is in the theater availability, and I can then verify if it is true or false. If it is true, that means it is available, right? So how I can just do that is, I'm just going to go back here. I'll just expand this, and let's say I'm going to give an alias for this, like, let's say, adjacent, and I'm going to join with the theater availability table here. Okay, I'm going to name this like, let's say, TA1. Okay, TA1. I'll tell you why I'm using 1. You'll just come to know in a short while. Okay, and then I'm going to do a join. So I'm going to do a join based on the seat number. So I'm just going to say TA1 dot seat number equal to my adjacent table dot the left seat, right? That is this seat. Okay, and then when doing so, I need to do a check saying that my TA1, I'm only taking those seat numbers where the TA1 is available column is going to be true always. Okay, so I'm just going to say this one. Okay, so what basically I'm doing is, for each left seat. So basically for each seat number that is present in my left seat, I'm joining it with the seat number from the theater availability table. And in the theater availability table, I'm taking only those seat numbers who are actually available. Now what this will do is, this query will only fetch those records where the seat numbers that are present in the left seat are actually available. Okay, so let's try to run this query. Now I think we have a lot of records here. So when I run this query, the number of records should reduce because only the available left seats will be fetched. So if I run this query, now you can see that the number of records have actually reduced, but I'm getting too many columns here. But the columns that I need is just from adjacent, let's say dot star. And now if I run this, I'll get only two columns, that is a left seat and right seat. Basically, these are the only left seats which are actually available. Okay, so I have done my validation check for the left seat. So these are all the left seats which are actually available. Now I need to do the similar validation for the right seat as well. So how can I do that? Now, in order to do that, I'm just going to copy this same thing. I'm just going to basically again use a self join. So theater availability table again, and this time I'm going to give an alias like, let's say TA2, and TA2 dot seat number equal to right seat this time, because I'm trying to validate the right seat this time, right? And again, the same check I need to do for my TA2 table as well. I'm just going to say TA2 is available equal to true. Okay, so initially here I checked that all the left seats were available, and then using this another table, I'm basically the same table one more time and just checking if the right seat is also available. Okay, now if I just run this code, and you can see that I'm only getting 4 records. So I have 14, 15, 21, 22, 22, 23 and 32, 33. Okay, so if I just run my check solutions now, and you can see the solution is correct, I'm getting the final output. Okay, so this is basically how I have solved this problem. Okay, so I hope you found some value from this video, and if you did, please make sure to give me a thumbs up and leave your feedback below. Now, if you liked this kind of video where I'm solving some SQL problems on StrataScratch, then definitely leave your feedback. Let me know if you'd like to see more videos where I'm solving more SQL problems on StrataScratch, and definitely I can do more. I actually wanted to solve 2 more problems on this video, but the video would have been extremely long, and that is why I'm just solving these 2 problems that I just showed. So that's all, guys. Thank you and see you soon in the next one. Bye.